Hi everyone, welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this new season, we're reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends. Welcome to what we're calling Season 2.5, Episode 1, where we take a deep look at Master Bard Thom Merrilin. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, and we drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today we're examining chapters 26 and 34 from The Great Hunt.
And I'll get us started with my summary of chapter 26 called Discord. The chapter begins with Rand's perspective in the foregate in Cairhien, just after he has learned that Thom is alive. He's in a giddy mood, and he doesn't care about a lot of other things going on, including the great game that Huron is talking about, or Loyal's concerns about running into other Ogier after he had fled his steading without permission. Rand convinces Loyal to come with them to meet Thom at the Bunch of Grapes, and leaves Huron behind to guard their room. They meet Dina waiting in the room instead of Thom, practicing her juggling. She is suspicious at first, but she warms up to them when Rand says he is there to return the flute and harp. She tells them about her plans with Thom, including her becoming a glee woman, performing next week, and the two of them leaving for Tyr after saving some money. Rand seems skeptical about these plans. Then Thom shows up and starts complaining to Dina about actors being allowed to follow his performance with their plays, unaware of Rand and Loyal's presence at first. When Dina points out the visitors, Thom asks her to leave for a while. He gushes about just how talented Dina is and how she will be a court bard someday, as the Gleeman's life is just not good enough for her, according to Thom, not Dina, by the way, and he plans to talk her out of life on the road. Rand doesn't waste much time after returning the flute and harp to get to his pitch, asking Thom if he wants to be involved in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a part of the stories, since Rand himself has the Horn of Valir. Thom assumes the naive youths have been scammed, and he can't stop laughing until Rand tells him that Moiraine believes it's the genuine article. That brings Thom up short. After assuring Thom that the Aes Sedai isn't with them, which seems to reassure the Gleeman, Rand explains that they've kept it secret and have to take it to Shinar while avoiding the Dark Prince and Shadowspawn tracking them. Of course. Thom muses aloud some about the last battle being near and about how it would only intensify the great game rather than put a stop to the power struggles here in Cairhien. But he refuses Rand's offer to come along for the ride. He's put foolishness like that behind him. Rand asks Loyal to leave the room, and the surprised Ogier says something about wanting to play dice in the common room anyway. When they're alone, Rand switches to another topic, the Prophecies of the Dragon. Thom quotes some for him. "Twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost, twice the dragon for the price he must pay." Thom and Rand both start counting the herons on Rand's clothing and sword, as Rand hides the brand on his palm. The Gleeman quotes another passage that doesn't make any sense to either of them, and Thom warns Rand that Aes Sedai are going to try to make events fit the prophecies as best they can. But Rand insists he's on no Aes Sedai puppet strings, which seems to satisfy Thom, who confesses that he used to think the boy could channel, which was the reason Moiraine had sought him out, Thom assumed. To take the attention from himself, Rand asks about Thom's nephew, and Thom fills in the rest of the story about how Owen was going mad from use of the One Power and was gentled, after which he died. Thom believes Rand must be out of this type of trouble since Moiraine has left him alone, with which Rand agrees. The shepherd asks Thom one more time to come with them on this quest to take the horn to Shinar, but Thom refuses and says they need to make a clean break. Rand doesn't need to keep visiting and tempting Thom to leave his happy life for such danger. When Rand leaves the room, the point of view switches to Thom's thoughts. As he chides himself aloud, trying to suppress dangerous thoughts of the horn, the innkeeper Zera appears to warn Thom not to get involved in Daes Daemar, as that outland lord who visited him could put him in danger. But he insists to Zera and himself that he and Rand are both out of it, and thus ends Chapter 26, Discord.
This chapter is another interesting chapter to me, having just finished the series, and we go back and get this perspective. I know part of it is Rand's point of view, but it's the same scene. And to cover Thom's point of view, we really have to cover Rand's. But it was so intriguing to me to see him this young again. Even though there's only a few years from the first book to the last book of the series, only a couple of 3 years at the most. It's still Rand still seems so young and so fresh, and it's almost painful to just open up the Great Hunt in the middle of it
Mm-hmm.
and pick out this scene of Rand, because you know what all he's going to go through, and you know how much he changes, and it's almost painful to see how naive he can be once again.
Yep.
But I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the view. A couple of things here. I kept wanting Thom to even say something about this. I wish someone would have at some point in the series, but it's the way that all the Emmenfielders boys really treat Loyal.
Yeah.
We've discussed this before. Loyal is just such a friend, and he really cares about them, and he's put himself in danger to be with them, and ostensibly it is to write his book and things he wants to study, but and especially once he finds out that Rand is the Dragon Reborn. Constantly throughout the series just discard Loyal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you stand in the corner over there. Yes, Loyal, I don't have time to hear about that.
Yeah.
And over and over again, they just override his concerns and just run roughshod over him. And I kind of wanted Thom, as the voice of courtesy and reason, at some point to say, Rand, maybe we should talk to Loyal a little differently from that. Yeah, maybe we should
Mm-hmm.
stop and listen to him occasionally. Have some courtesy. Because we know Thom, he's one of these people whom I admire, and I've known some people like him in real life. They could stand and talk to any farmer about their pigs, or they could talk economics with the President of the United States. And, it seems like in any situation, they're comfortable with who they are and with the subjects that they discuss and the things that they know. So, yeah, I would have liked Thom to have given them those pointers there. One thing that Rand does, I think it's unconsciously in this
Mm-hmm.
chapter, he brings up Owen. Now, well, he brings him up intentionally, but
Mm-hmm.
I believe he's unconsciously trying to use Owen to put Thom on a guilt trip to make Thom, come with him. Uh,
Mm.
and to, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I believe in his mind, he's trying to find someone who understands what he's going through without coming right out and saying, yes, I can channel. Yes, Moiraine really thinks I'm the Dragon Reborn. He doesn't believe it himself at this point. He's still going through the whole Tam is my father syndrome right now.
Yeah.
But it's like he's trying to reach out to someone who'll understand what he's going through. And Thom had mentioned his nephew before. And but I think from Thom's point of view, it's just that guilt trip. It makes him want to help Rand, even though he knows better. And I like Thom at this point in the series very much, because he seems so happy, and he's one of these people we want to see happy. We want to see him in a good place in life. And to me, it does my heart good to see him here with Dina. He's in love, even though we know he's way too old for her. It may be more infatuation on her part than anything else. I know she's excited to learn the Gleeman craft, and I believe Thom is training her to be one of the best pupils he's ever seen, because even though this is not a highly patriarchal society, there are no female gleemen. That's
Mm-hmm.
not a thing in their world. And so if she's going to break that glass ceiling, if she's going to break that boundary, she can't be mediocre. She has to be
Mm.
one of the best at the craft in all parts of it. And I think that's one reason he talks about her, that she's not going to be a gleeman. She's going to be a court bard.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really, really aim high. You can't just get your foot in the door. You've got to go in and announce yourself in a big way. What are some of your thoughts on those topics, on Thom's happiness and his relationship with Dina?
Yeah, so I think that Thom is being dishonest with her, and he is doing it ostensibly to protect her or to help her fulfill her potential. But he seems unable to fully commit to either having a relationship with her or to keeping his distance to protect her. So that's kind of the sense I'm getting. From Dina's comments, and what I'm talking about in terms of him being dishonest with her is that from her comments before Thom comes into the room, she's talking about plans that Rand notices there's really no hints that they're actually in motion. It sounds like stuff, well, someday we're going to do this, and maybe they're not actually going to do that. It's like maybe something they just talk about, but Dina seems to believe that they really will go to Tyr and go to the Athanmir Islands and stuff like that. She also says that Thom is going to let her perform next week, and I wonder why he hasn't let her perform with him already, because she's so clever and played the flute the first time better than Rand ever did after all that practice and everything else.
Yes.
And Rand was able to, play for his supper. So I just wonder why he keeps waiting. I think you had a pretty good explanation, but this isn't stated explicitly in the text, but I do get the sense that like him letting her perform is something that he keeps saying, oh, next week. And it just never quite comes. It's one of those someday things. I'm not sure, but that's just kind of the sense I get here. I could be wrong because we don't have a lot of textual evidence there for sure.
Right.
But just the sense I'm getting that they talk about plans that haven't really gone anywhere yet. Because he's wary of committing, because he is afraid he is going to drag her down in some way. And then when he talks to Zara, and we know that because when he talks to Zara, the innkeeper, at the very end of this chapter, Zara mentions, just marry Dina, she deserves that, basically, just kind of settle down with her. And he balks at that idea. He's like, really? Would I marry her, saddle her with an old husband and with my past and everything? And so he seems to think that his past would somehow prevent her from being a court bard. If we go back to what Loyal pointed out, she doesn't want to be a court bard. She doesn't even want that career choice that he thinks fits her. So it's interesting to me that he doesn't want to saddle his past with her through marriage, but he's actually already doing that with as involved as they already are. He's just not fully committing to her. He's almost like leading her on because he doesn't plan to fully commit, but she seems to think they're going to be, just traveling and on the road, gleaming, performing together. And so it's like, to me, he's selfishly keeping her in this limbo that seems contrary to what she would want. And it actually reminds me a lot of how Lan and Nynaeve's dynamic is early on. Lan tells Nynaeve in The Eye of the World that he could never marry her because he has nothing to offer and his death would hurt her and blah, blah, blah. And so instead of making this clean break, though, which his words would suggest that maybe he should do, he keeps trying to have it both ways. He gives her his ring, he keeps doting on her in some way, but then pulling back, and he keeps fighting this idea of saddling her with his tragic fate. He keeps resisting marriage. So both of these men, Lan and Thom, in my eyes, I see them making this one-sided decision about their relationship status, and they're telling themselves that it's something self-sacrificial and for the benefit of the woman, but they don't seem to realize that it's actually kind of insulting to her agency. So does Dina or Nynaeve, do either of them not get a say in whether the consequences are worth it? Whether the baggage of this man is something they really want to sign up for? I think Thom should just maybe be upfront about the fact that he's not ready to be that serious because of his own issues, instead of pretending that it's something for her own good. So I think it's interesting because it seems like a kind of an immature relationship pattern to me for somebody who is so old. But I think Thom is really confused about what he wants, and that's something that we see in this chapter. He's very conflicted about his level of involvement he wants to have with Rand as well, and he keeps trying to suppress his thoughts about wanting to be involved in Rand's life. And I think it's interesting that you pointed out, too, that Rand brought up Owen in a way that sort of could manipulate Thom to get into the situation. Not that Rand is a very manipulative person.
No, not yet, anyway.
Right, exactly. But now that when you brought that up, I remembered that the last time Thom told Rand and Matt that story was right before he, looked like he sacrificed himself for them in Whitebridge. I guess Rand's association with that would lead him to believe, maybe on some kind of unconscious level, that getting Thom to open up with that amount of intimacy again would get him involved in kind of on Rand's side like he was at that time. So yeah, I'm seeing an unwillingness to commit in a few different ways with Thom, and I'm seeing a lot of hesitancy and inner conflict about the level he wants to be involved with other people. Because I think he's afraid of getting hurt in both scenarios. He is sort of playing off this Dina situation as he's afraid of hurting her, but with Rand, he just doesn't want to hurt himself, right? And be involved in Aes Sedai business and stuff like that. I feel like I thought he was a pretty nice dude, but I'm seeing that like some of his patterns, because of the way he's dealing with his own personal issues and the way I don't want to say takes it out on other people, but the way it influences his relationships here makes him seem less of a wise figure than I thought that he was my first read through. That's, I guess, how I would sum that up.
I mean, that's so intriguing. I'm almost at a loss for words here because we've talked before about how Thom is such a deep character. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many undercurrents to him. Yet, what I took to be a simple relationship, and let's face it, any older man can have a quote unquote midlife crisis and be
Yeah.
attracted to a younger woman who shows attention to him, and and I took it very much at face value that yeah, he was happy with her. He just wanted to stay there and do his thing. He didn't want to be traveling the world again. When he's got some happiness and joy in his life, but
Yeah.
you're right, it is so much deeper than that. And again, that shows, jokingly here, the difference between how men view the world and how women view the world, and maybe why there's so much confusion in relationships because you picked up things that I never would have dreamed of, but it makes a lot of sense. It really fits with what's going on here. That yes, he is kind of happy. He is enjoying things. It's not a real relationship. Again, I think they have different goals, and right now those
Yeah.
goals are aligned. She's learning from him. She's happy with him, and like you said, they keep talking about traveling the world, but I missed that detail. But you're right. When Rand walked into the room, and she mentioned that, he kind of looks around and he's like, "Well, it doesn't look like anybody's going anywhere soon." There's even
Yeah.
a potted plant in the window. That's not the kind of thing that you just can lightly move. It's not someone who's ready to leave tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, Although Thom, in the next chapter that we look at, he is ready to start making some moves.
Mm-hmm.
That might be spurred on as much by anything to get away from Rand and the
Yeah.
Emondfield characters, and to make sure that he doesn't get mixed up in what they're doing, what's going on with them, as well as just the general disgust at Kyrie and the great game politics. But
Right.
it did end, or near the end of that chapter, had a little bit of sad foreshadowing to me when he's
Mm-hmm.
speaking with the innkeeper Zara, and she talks about the great game, and he's trying to convince her I'm not involved. He's echoing Rand here. I'm not involved in that. I'm ignoring that stuff. And she says, "You'll have your throat cut for you if you don't watch out." End quote.
Mm.
And
Yep.
again, I'm getting into my point of view chapter in a minute, but yeah, that one hurt when I read that.
There definitely is foreshadowing here, and this chapter does, I think, give us a lot to think about in terms of foreshadowing. It is interesting to go back to this from a rereader's perspective, seeing Rand being so naive, but also seeing Thom differently, because I remember him being a lot different later in the story than he is early on here. And I think the events in your upcoming chapter are a big catalyst for that, and also Matt helping him through his drinking problem coming
Yes.
up in the next book. So I forgot just how early on in these books Thom seems so much more self-absorbed and pretentious than he does later on. He has this personality of a gleeman that's more than just an act he can kind of put on. I think that's sort of his personality at this time. Towards the end of the chapter, when Rand asks about the prophecies, Thom can't just give him a straight answer to his question. He starts complaining about how nobles don't speak the old tongue like they're supposed to. And then earlier in the chapter, the first thing he does when he appears in the room, Dina finally lets him go after they stop making out. First thing he does is complain about some artists that don't meet his standards for how like performance art should be done, in his opinion. It's not like, "Oh, hey, how was your day?" or "Have you been working on your juggling while I was away?" or anything like that. His first thing is to just kind of have this professional disdain for different types of artists.
Yes, yes. The show is the
So,
most important thing to him.
yes, yes. It's interesting to me from both of those, from a couple of these tidbits, I get the sense that Thom has quite a bit of insecurity. And we can see this later in the series, like we just covered, I mean, really just a few episodes ago towards the end of our Matt season, how Thom was starting to feel irrelevant in Matt's story. And how he didn't know what he had left to offer. I think he's feeling that early on here too, but for different reasons, right? He's not just irrelevant and, oh, how can I help our heroes, right? He isn't at that stage yet. He's feeling potentially irrelevant in his craft when he sees a new craft start to pop up. I think he's so angry about actors and plays because he could see how that could capture an audience's attention in ways that his craft doesn't. I think he's in denial about the fact that that's why he's upset about it. But I think he worries about these new players being competition. I also wonder if there's some part of him that thinks of Dina as potential competition, and that's why she hasn't performed with him yet, despite how talented she is. There is that potential where he realizes to distinguish herself and really make Glee women a possibility. Maybe she does have to be twice as good as any Glee man.
Yes.
But I also wonder if he fears being this irrelevant old man when she surpasses him on the stage. I think he easily can feel insecure about this because she is so young anyway, and he might feel like kind of inadequate in their relationship in some ways. And so there's probably a lot of weird dynamics there. Even though he loves her, she could be potential competition. So if he keeps her at this apprentice stage longer than he actually needs to, that keeps him relevant longer. That keeps her needing him. He's useful to somebody at that point.
Right.
He handles these feelings a lot worse early on in the story about feeling irrelevant than he does later. He just kind of wistfully talks about it with Matt, much later in the series. But now he handles it kind of immaturely to me.
Yeah, it's as if he's not ready for that yet, and it's probably not something he's thought of or has, I don't know, outlined in his mind in any way. It's something just on the subconscious level, something below the surface that he feels but hasn't really thought of yet. Because that would be difficult. And he's already talked about how she can hear a song one time and she has it, not just the words, but the nuances and the sort of the pauses at the right place. She has that innate sense of timing, and so she has the potential to be very, very good. So you're right. As long as he can be the one who is still teaching her, then he doesn't have to sit in the crowd and watch her perform and be ignored.
Yeah, and that's less that he has to worry about her getting scooped up by some other man too. That's probably an insecurity he has. Like, well, at some point she's going to realize she doesn't need this old fart laying around, and she'll find some younger guy.
An odd thing, that's what men say a lot of times when their wife is very successful. When a wife is more successful in business endeavors or whatever, men tend to say things like that a lot. But what happens an amazing amount of time when a woman is more successful than her husband or partner, whatever the case may be, is he tends to have an affair, not her. That's one of these things I've read about, because he starts to feel so irrelevant in the relationship. And so for some reason, just wanting to feel relevant, wanting to feel, I don't know exactly what it is. It's more of an emotional thing than a thought process. Men often reach out and cheat in those situations and have affairs because they, I guess they feel powerless in some way. They're trying to gain some power over the relationship. But verbally, what they say is, "I'm afraid she's going to go out and find some younger man or somebody better than me." But the opposite is typically what happens. It's a strange dynamic.
Oh, that's interesting. I could see Thom self-sabotaging in that way. Now, if his relationship with Dina had been able to continue, he keeps thinking that he's not good enough for her in some way. He can't saddle her with his past or whatever, that she deserves bigger and better in life. And so because of that, instead of doing the right thing and just breaking up with her, which might be too difficult for him to do, he might go and do something stupid that would make her break up with him. And that's something people do a lot of times when they have a hard time facing their feelings. And that may be underlying that phenomenon you're talking about there. Instead of waiting for the other person to hurt you, you hurt them first so that they reject you. And I feel like Thom he's starting to get some kind of itch, he's checking off all these boxes of reasons he thinks he should be happy, but Rand's appearance reminds him that he has this wanderlust. And I think that's what's happening in the chapter anyway, and why he seems spurred to make some changes in the beginning of the next chapter, as you already mentioned.
Right.
So I think that he would have started to feel some kind of itch one way or another, and he would have done something. It may not have been cheating. It may have been just disappearing and going after the horn with Rand. There might have been some universe where he did that, or something to upset her so that she would break up with him, or something like insulting her skill or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, that's interesting that you brought up that pattern, because I really could see that Thom he's not fully committed to her. He's got some of his own issues, and I think some of it is some insecurities, and that he's handling it a little bit poorly already, and it has the potential to get even worse.
Right. And I'm not saying this would have interfered with his relationship with Dina, but when Rand mentioned Moiraine, Thom perked up in their conversation. It caught his interest. He's like, oh yeah, I can find 10 guys who have the Horn of Valyr or will sell it to you or whatever. And he says, well, Moiraine thinks it's the Horn of Valyr, and Thom he stops at that point.
Yeah.
There's no more buffoonery. He is attentive. He's like, oh, Moiraine said what? I think most of it is the fact that her word carries a lot of weight with Thom. But again, it's a little bit of foreshadowing that this is someone to whom Thom has a lot of respect, or for whom Thom has a lot of respect, and it catches his attention. And that Moiraine is not a laughing matter. Dina is not a laughing matter. I think he really cares for Dina, but it's not love. It's a midlife crisis, and the two of them really care for each other. And I think there would be broken hearts no matter what direction this story went in concerning Thom and Dina. Not what Thom goes through, as we'll find out later.
Right.
What he goes through, I think is the grief is much worse than the broken heart would have been.
I think so. I think we have really dived pretty deep into Thom's psyche in this chapter, and we still have one to go, which is kind of wild to me. So if you don't have any other notes on this chapter, because I don't, I'll go ahead and let you give us your summary of chapter 34.
Right. Chapter 34 is entitled The Wheel Weaves. Thom Merrilin was in a bad mood as he walked down the dawn streets of Cairhien, back toward the inn where he and Dina stayed. He had played most all night at Lord Barthanes' party, but the nobles mostly just wanted to mock him or ply him for information about the new young Lord Althor. Thom felt old and tired, and he was sick of the game of houses and wanted nothing to do with any of it. He smiled when he finally got to the room and saw Dina laying on the bed, fully clothed, facing the wall. She must have fallen asleep waiting for him. Dina was a wonderful apprentice and was overjoyed at the thought of becoming the first female gleeman. He decided to wake her now and tell her that tonight she would play before her first audience. But when he turned her toward him, Thom saw that Dina was not asleep. She was dead. There was the barest creak of sound as the wardrobe doors opened behind him. Thom spun and threw his knives, killing one man and wounding a second. He pinned the wounded man and held a knife to his face as he questioned him. It wasn't anything personal, just a great game, the man babbled to Thom. Lord Barthanes just wanted some information from Thom. Everyone wanted to know more about this Lord Althor. There could be money in it for both of them. Lots of money. Thom let the would-be assassin know that it was personal to him, and he made a swift killing blow with his knife just as the man reached for his own dagger. The innkeeper Zara rushed in at the noise, sharing Thom's grief at poor Dina and promising to, quote, take care of her. Thom handed her his full purse to cover the expenses and prepared to leave. He was going back out to Lord Barthanes' manor. Zara saw the anger in his eyes and tried to stop him, even using a guilt trip over, quote, what Dina would want, end quote. Then she gave him some vital pieces of information as she recognized the men that Thom had killed. Barthanes was already dead, killed that very night in his own mansion, but these men had not worked for him anyway. Everybody knew that they worked for King Galdrian. There was no way that Thom could get near the king to exact any revenge. Then they heard a roar in the distance, and light began flaring from the granaries across town. It appeared that a riot was starting in Cairhien. Quote, I'm only an old gleeman, he said from the door. Who could I possibly be dangerous to? End quote.
And this is, I think, the first time reader would learn that Thom is a dangerous man.
Yes.
Before this, in the eye of the world, we saw that he had knives, and I'm sure he helped some in the Trolloc fights. I don't remember a ton of detail about that until, obviously, he holds off the Fade long enough for the boys to get away. That's pretty important, but
yes,
we had not seen him be dangerous in terms of being able to pretty quickly kill other humans. That had not happened before. Zira was right to keep warning him that he was going to get into some danger and that he needed to leave and not get caught up in the great game with this outland lord following him. It's interesting. Zira seems so comfortable speaking so frankly with him like this. He thinks in his thoughts that he's known her for a while throughout his travels and that they can speak pretty frankly like that with each other. And I just wonder what their history is, because they know each other well enough. They have such a level of trust that he can just hand over a bag of money and be like, hey, can you handle all these dead bodies for me and make sure people don't ask questions? I don't know anybody to that degree where I could go in a hotel and people show up dead and be like, here, you take care of this. I'm going to run away.
Right.
So we realized, Thom, it raises so many more questions about his past here than we might have had before. He's dangerous. He knows people who seem to understand this about him, don't seem too shocked to find dead bodies in his room, and seem willing to help him hide them. So yeah, it just gets us wondering, how and why was Thom ever caught up in the great game in the past? It seems clear that he's had some involvement with it, because Zira was like, there you go again. And so it's clear by now that he is not what he seemed to be from our protagonist's perspective back in the previous book. Right. There is a lot more than meets the eye to Thom.
And it had to have been when he was very young, because by the time that he had a relationship with Morgase Trakand, he was already well versed in the game of houses. So he
was already helping Morgase's mother,
right? So
long before Morgase came to power.
So he must have been in Cairhien for many years, probably as a traveling gleeman. It probably stayed at that inn many times, and had gotten into fights or whatever else happened in his misspent youth. And by the time he was well versed in the game of houses, he had probably carried out a few assassinations and things like that. I'm just guessing from the way he handles himself. Goes to become a court bard at Camlin until he's eventually has to leave Camlin under the threat of death, and has just been traveling as a gleeman once again ever since. Thom is a person who has a lot of pride in his craft, and you can see that by the fact that he was not just a wandering gleeman. He had to have been professionally trained to be a court bard, because he had to know court etiquette, he had to know history, he had to know songs, again, in the high chant and other forms of singing that he's explained to the boys at different times in the story. So there may even be schools for that. We don't know. Or perhaps you serve an apprentice, something, or you apprentice to a court bard, something. There's got to be some in-depth training that goes on for someone to be a court bard. And I can see in my mind where he did that, but he gets involved in other things and travels around. And then to go from that to being a traveling gleeman pays the bills, and it keeps you alive, and it probably keeps you out of the game of houses and away from the courts and all the intrigue and the things that would get him killed. But he was still drawn back to it very easily. It doesn't take much for Thom to fall back into those things. So I wish we knew more about his past. From this, we're just gleaning little bits and pieces. I do have to say, if out of all the friends that I have and people that I know, any of them would be surprised if they walked in my room and there were dead bodies there.
Yeah.
And they would be greatly surprised. But I do have a few friends that I could hand some money to and say, can you take care of this? And they would. So
yeah.
that's very sad, but I know people who could handle that for me. So I hope that never occurs, but I honestly think they would if I ask. So it's
you're a well-connected person is what I'm hearing.
Yes. And I assume things like this happen often enough that as long as they're not nobility in any way, there's probably not even a reason to go to the authorities. It's
Right.
just, I'm sure there's paupers graveyards for people. It's just common to go bury people or something like that. There's
Yeah.
no one to report it to, no police to get in trouble with.
Right, right.
So
Even though these cities have civil guards and everything, it
right,
appears that nobody in the Wheel of Time series, with the exception of the Shan-Chan, I guess, most societies don't seem to have policing as we understand it in the modern industrialized world.
right,
Which
right,
it's interesting because the type of policing we have that feels a little more all-encompassing. Somebody calls the cops anytime a neighbor is too loud or something like
right,
that, and you understand that's something you can do. You can call 911 anytime. That's not something we had anything like that until the 1800s. We started getting more of kind of a police force that was all over the place, and we didn't even have 911 until like the 1960s, which blew my
right.
mind.
Yes,
So yeah, it's interesting because I keep bringing my modern industrialized world assumptions to this like 17th century-ish technology and social environment of the
right.
Wheel of Time, and then I'm like, oh well, I guess actually you're right. If you, like you said, especially with the social stratification in Kyrian, if they're not nobility, there's probably not going to be anybody asking you too many questions. And if there are, you could just bribe the people who would come investigate if
Right.
somebody did call the civil guard.
There you go. I didn't think of that, but that's very, very true. The bribery and the majority of that money, I had the feeling, was to take care of a nice funeral for Dina.
Yeah.
Not for the two guys. It's like, yeah, if we can find a convenient ditch somewhere, get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
But make a nice funeral for her. She deserves it.
Yeah.
And I find this part of the story so heartbreaking. I always have, not just Tom's broken heart, but for Dina. I mean, she was going to be a groundbreaking figure. She had the potential to be a spin-off novel all her own, and I don't think Jordan ever had
Yeah.
any intention of that. But
No.
you just, to see someone who's young, vibrant, intelligent, and to see their life cut short is always heartbreaking to me. And so when I come across it in fiction like this, it still is difficult for me. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like to see good people go through these terrible things.
Her death illustrates the principle that Moraine explains to Perrin in The Dragon Reborn, that the pattern's neither good nor evil, that it brings about balance. Because this act of Dina dying is the catalyst that gets Thom to leave and then to be available to attach himself to Matt later.
Right.
And that helps Rand take the Stone of Tyr and fulfill prophecies. He guards Shale Ghul at the end of the series. He's very important to saving the world, and that is part of Rand's ta'veren, twisting the actions of the pattern into moving pawns where they need to be,
Right.
basically. And Dina was a casualty of that. And I think this just shows that the pattern is going to make the things that are supposed to happen, no matter the cost to just kind of bystanders.
Right. Right. And to put that into perspective, Tom's retaliation of this kind of begins the Kyrian Civil War. I mean,
Yeah.
the riots have already started. We've already had Barthanas murdered by dark friends, and let's
Yeah,
face it, he
but he kicks
deserves it.
off the succession crisis.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the Civil War breaks out, and thousands are killed.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds are homeless and lose everything. Oliver, Oliver is one of the
Yeah.
casualties of that, because even though his father was killed by the Shido, the just them wandering around, nothing, no food, no medicine, his mother dying of sickness, was
Mm-hmm.
because of the Kyrian Civil War, was because of Dina's death. So Oliver
Mm.
would not have been a part of our story. He would not have been, he wouldn't have been an orphan. He probably would have still had his mother had the Kyrian
Yeah.
Civil War not taken place. And so the domino effect is crazy. And just,
Mm-hmm.
how many innocent people suffer because these two men killed her rather than just waiting for Thom, tying her up and waiting for Thom. But she was in the way of their plans, and it's just, it's sad. But like you said, the pattern is just looking to bring things about, not looking to for the good or the bad or for an individual's life.
Mm-hmm. I think if we zoom back into just Tom's psyche, though, I think this chapter and the one that we just covered before it, they both show him to be kind of naive in some ways, despite being so much older and wiser than our Emmons Fielders. And we see how naive the Emmons Fielders are, with Rand
Oh,
still
yes.
being so just so fresh faced and young and doesn't have a care in the world in this chapter. You know, Thom knows a lot of things, that he's helped these kids survive, stuff they wouldn't have known otherwise, how to make a living for themselves on the road. He knows some about the great game. He even taught these kids just how to avoid pickpockets and just how to be in a city. Thom is still naive. He's naive enough to think that he can be out of it. And this still relates to our discussion we just had about the pattern. He thinks he can be out of everything that's going on just by saying that he is, just by saying he doesn't want to be involved, that he's not going to be involved. And it's interesting that it's not that different from what Matt does later. We know Matt is the king of denial when insisting he's not a hero.
Yes.
Rand does a whole lot of denial, and he's still doing that here, insisting to Thom and kind of to himself that he can't channel and that he's not truly the dragon. Perrin shuts out the wolves, and he's in denial of everything that allows him to do for a long time. And so despite Thom coming into the story as an already developed character, and I think that's how you put it when we were discussing planning the season off the air, that makes Thom kind of interesting. He's mysterious and he's already developed when he gets on the stage, so to speak. We find here that he still has plenty of room for change. He still has these walls built up. He still has denial to work through. He's got some insecurities in his relationship. And it kind of just shows, it's funny. I just thought of this too. It's ironic how he thought that all the Kyrian and nobility would think of the last battle approaching as just one other thing that they could use in the great game.
Right.
That they thought of it as something fairly trivial and had all this hubris to think that humans really could have any kind of influence over this. Anybody except for the dragon, basically,
Right.
could make any kind of impact, or just kind of this narrow tunnel vision. It's ironic he was pointing that out in other people just in the previous chapter, but I think he's doing the same thing. He thinks that he can get away from this when he's not realizing there's stuff so much bigger than himself and all of his dreams and his goals and what he wants right now. The pattern is pulling him into this web surrounding Rand.
Right.
And there's not anything he can do about that. And he's going to have to learn that. And we see in the next book with Matt is where he really starts to work that out.
Right. Something I had not realized until now, but hearing you describe that, you see Rand's Taviran nature at work here, or the pattern, creating a Taviran, however you want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
That had these events not occurred, Kyrian would have been pretty much a stronger force throughout the rest of the story, a stronger city, but probably one that would not be interested in bowing to the dragon,
right,
and having anything to do with it. Again, they're trying to use everything for their benefit rather than joining in. And were they not torn up by civil strife and then later by their attacks by the Shido, they probably would have stood in the way of the unification of the nations and the dragon being able to do what he had to do rather than being a part of it. So they enter in the end of the story as a much weaker force under a foreign queen, really, if you would, even though she has Kyrian blood and she has a right to the throne. But yeah, they enter in that weakened state rather than be strong and stand opposed to what the pattern needed them to be. So,
yeah,
I talked about how Dina's death, caused all these other things to happen, but in a way that may have been one of the catalysts that saved all of, humanity and the world. Just her death sparking all these other deaths in the civil unrest in order to bring Kyrie to its knees so it can be useful.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a very cold kind of logic you have to realize I think the benefits of some of the things that the pattern brought about to make the ending of the story all wrap up nicely to keep the wheel turning. Kyrian basically had to be, I guess, what we would call now a failed state.
Yes.
For Rand to be able to take control of it, like you said. And Yeah, it's very sad. It's this point that Robert Jordan brings up many times, but especially in the Fires of Heaven, where he has a chapter titled "The Lesser Sadness." So
Yes.
the saddest thing is a battle that you lose, but only the second saddest thing is winning it, because there's still such a
Right.
huge, huge cost.
So the author understood this very clearly, and the costs involved. And we see his character here, Thom Merrilin, understands this very clearly. When he walks out the door with those words, "I'm only an old gleeman, who could I possibly be dangerous to?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reader knows. It's in blazing letters, neon sign above his head. He's going to go kill the king.
Yeah.
We we don't have to be told that. It's so, but it's so implicit in this, the anger he has, and really this is where you find out Tom's capabilities more
Mm-hmm.
so than taking down these two attackers.
Yep.
Is in the aftermath later when you find out the things that happened to Chiron. Oh, the king was killed that night, and and here Thom, he makes it through the Secret Service or whatever else is around the king,
Yeah.
takes him out, and uses the smokescreen of the riot, which was very, again, Taveran timing, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, on Rand's part,
Yep.
unknowingly. Yeah, Thom is a dangerous man when he wants to be dangerous. He would
Yeah.
rather not be, and that's one of the things I admire about him is he would
Mm-hmm.
rather not be a dangerous man. But
Oh yeah,
we
that's
get
probably why he hid in the life of a gleeman. I mean, you don't have to keep
yes,
killing that way.
right, yeah, you don't have to kill people when you're a gleeman. You could just travel around, make enough money to eat, and you suffer on the cold nights, but you get to perform before crowds, which is really what he loves to do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you don't have to be dangerous when you're just an old gleeman. Fate and the pattern will not allow him to remain a nameless old gleeman, and I love Tom's character. I always have, but this is, to me, enlightening. We've discussed a lot of things that I never saw about his character before.
Hmm.
Again, I knew there were depths there, but you're very perceptive at picking out these things that I don't see, and I think Robert Jordan wrote him to be the kind of character you can both admire and fear.
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited to dig into that as we finish up his character in the next episode.
Yeah,
He's got so
only
few points of view that we can do it in just two.
yes, but he makes a great interlude bonus chapter here. So
Yeah.
I hope everyone will join us next time for our interlude episode 2, when we'll cover the rest of Tom's point of views in chapters 4 and 17 of The Shadow Rising and chapters 44 and 48 from A Memory of Light.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes posted to YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane, that's Lajaradayne. We love to hear how we're doing, so leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen to us. You can also contact us by emailing at lajaradane, that's Dayne, at gmail.com, or on Twitter at mind_wheel. To support the show and get access to a couple of perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.